Hello everybody, welcome. It's funny, from up high here on Strawberry Hill in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, I can look down on the surface of the waters and I can see the fishes. Ichthyos. And I'm going to start this recording by making some corrections to things I misheard. Verbal mondegreens, if you will, while listening to Ammon HIllman, DC Ammon HIllman, who I was listening to just a moment ago on Gnostic Informer podcast. And there's so many things that HIllman isn't saying directly, but is rather indirectly implying. And that indirection is a sign of nuanced sophistication, in my view. Because when you just out and out declare something, part of our mind naturally recoils from this explicit conceptual equivalence. And note that word, equivalence. Equivalence. And, I think of myself as a little bit of a cunning linguist, a slightly cunning linguist. And I have some familiarity with Hebrew, which introduces to me the idea of roots and their primacy beneath the surface of the languages that emerge from the strange, almost pharmacological mixing of ideas, eidolon, right? Eidolon, idols, images. Mage is. Now that's the schizophrenic linguism, right? The schizophrenic linguism sees that library begins with lie and thinks it means falsehood, and probably doesn't know what brary means. And I don't actually have any background for that. And a truly intelligent person who is suffering from and or enjoying the schizogenesis of their consciousness, sometimes produced or enhanced by drugs. The truly intelligent broken phrenes, right? What are these phrenes? They are like perhaps sheaves or skeins. They are, well, this I think was one of the Greek hypostases, and I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be accurate. Ator, or the belly, the cardia, or the heart. The phrenes. What are the rest of them? Mnemosyne, aid me, come to my aid. Memorial Mother. Phrenes. The hypostases are a crucially important topic introduced to me by Julian Jaynes in his Sigenic text. Okay, right when I say that, somebody starts playing bagpipes. And it's the specific song that is played in the Monty Python skit. Yeah, with the skirted bagpipers. What are the other hypostases? Cardia, Ator, the Phrenes. Well, perhaps it'll come back to me. Julian Jaynes's Sigenic book, The Origins of Consciousness in the Breakdown, right, of the bicameral mind, which title actually suggests a kind of schizogenic a multi-threaded disunification of consciousness and thought over epochs of human history. And in that book, he argues that our distant ancestors, and once again, this is brilliant in terms of theoria, it is good for seeing. We don't have to decide whether it's factual or not. We can take the insight, we can filter off the profound, iridescent surface of the liquid and taste it in the eye of the mind, and we will know if it is good for seeing. Jaynes has a variety of theses and brilliantly introduces some neologisms to show us how consciousness works, after bemoaning his attempts to understand it by testing animals and not finding what he was looking for there in his early education. And he certainly got some things about the hemispheres wrong, but neuroscience was early and he wasn't a neuroscientist. Really, he was a kind of a linguist and a philosopher who was examining Homer particularly, and the Greek, which HIllman likens to an instrument that liberates you from both lies and modernity. He likens it to a sort of linguistic, I was going to use the term hypodermic, but no, he would use this other term that I will refrain from using, which means a sexual implement that can be used to introduce certain elixirs or dotes, poisons, antidotes to the human body via orifices. I need to correct something before I get too lost here, and that is that in previous videos I spoke of Haîma, as if it were related to the word Hymen. And this turns out to be almost certainly incorrect. As my friend Nate Guimont explains, and he says, which I'm sure he's copying some stuff here, but Hymen, joining, and Haîma, heat, blood, are technically not related. Hymen means to join together, hence the goddess of marriage from the Proto-Indo-European root men, to sew together, joiner. It is also recorded in Greek as, I can't read the Greek word, Haîma, he also shows the Greek word blood, comes from the passive present perfect of aetho, esmai, from Proto-Hellenic aetho, Proto-Indo-European hyed, burn, or fire. Cognate with Latin aestus, estius, and aedus, and Sanskrit indhe, to light, set on fire. Sure, let's break down the etymology and meaning of Hymen and Haîma, or Haîma, to understand technically why they're not related. Hymen, meaning and origin. Hymen refers to a membrane, specifically the vaginal membrane, or the Greek god of marriage. The term comes from the Greek word Hymen, associated with the Greek god of marriage and weddings. The root of the word is traced back to Proto-Indo-European sjömen, meaning to sew together or joiner. Now, I think HIllman would object and say, no, bro, you've fallen under the 19th century British pie trance, right? P-I-E. Haîma means blood in Greek. Etymology, the Greek word Haîma comes from the passive present perfect of aetho, meaning to burn or to be on fire. This is really important. I think HIllman would tell us amazing things about this, because whenever he speaks about burning, he's usually talking about substances found around the orifices of initiates and or museae or medicine women, right? Med literally comes from this. Related concepts. The connection between fire and blood might be metaphorical, relating to the color of blood and the idea of life force. Okay, so these words have different roots. They have different meanings. There's no overlapping concepts between joining, sewing, and blood, fire, indicating that the words developed independently in terms of meaning and usage. In conclusion, Hymen and Haîma are not related because they stem from entirely different PIE roots, have different meanings, and evolved in different contexts within the Greek language. Their similarity in sound is purely coincidental. This does not reflect any linguistic or etymological connection. Now, this is my friend Nate, my new friend, and I don't know, it looks to me like he actually composed this long text that he sent me regarding this, which I am deeply appreciative of, because unlike an ideologue or an idiot, I want to be corrected when I get things wrong. I want to see better. And so in this video, I will announce the mistake that I made, which was a natural mistake. I spoke briefly in my video yesterday of such linguistic mondegreens, which word usually is a neologism referring to misheard lyrics. Most famously, in the song "Blinded by Light," as if this weren't sophisticatedly related to the topics at hand, Manfred Mann Earth Band there's a lyric in there that really hard to understand, but it sounds like wrapped up like a douche into a runner in the night, blinded, right? And this is so Christos in Hillman's, linguistic, etymological, and philological traipsings. So I misheard what Hyllman was saying with these words Haîma, and given my absolute fascination, okay, so here's the here's the underlying psychic and cognitive origins of my mondegreen. Because in the labyrinthine understructure of consciousness, and particularly linguistic consciousness, there's a para-schizophrenic, roiling turbulence that can lead us toward insight, but also can lead us to insanity or confusion, right? With fusion, meaning mixing unlike things, like Haîma and Hymen. And for me, there's so much here because Hillman is talking of the power of virginal youths in the ancient world, and particularly Greece and various countries in what we now think of as Europe, including Georgia, the Black Sea area, Italy, Sicily, perhaps, though he rarely mentions it specifically in this way, areas in the Middle East and so forth. And how there's this incredible confusion going on between mystery traditions, languages, pharmacological understanding, medicine, all sort of turbulently swirling around. So in my own mind, what's going on is I'm thinking, the women who used the venoms were the origin of medicine, Medea, this med, which is actually the MD is what is important here. And notice that we omit the vowel in our own nomenclature, MD, which we think means medical doctor, but I think Hillman would smirk and say, and call him a madman, be my guest. He would smirk and say, nah, bruh, these are the masters of the purple, the oistros, the dips, what, the snake venom. And it's just it's an accident that medical doctor uses the two consonants that are the root that come to us, he would claim, from Medea, and who was a youth, right? Obviously she became a woman, but there were many, apparently in ancient times, there were many children, like late phase children and early phase teens, who had magical or divinatory powers, who were possessed, who inherited medical knowledge, because someone taught Medea. Someone. And I don't really know where she comes from, though Hillman makes some noises about this. So what happened to me is I'm thinking all these things. I'm thinking Haîma, blood, venoms, making drugs in the human body with various exudates, right, secretions of the body, the capacity to turn the body into a pharmacy by making cuts on the surface of the skin and wrapping these in medicated cloths containing venoms and botanicals. And the one thing I haven't heard Hillman directly say, but I think is nonetheless very likely, dusts, soils. These are fundamental to many ancient cultures' ceremonies and rites. Specific dusts. When I was transferred an Iniskim by my friend Ryan Firstdiver, he gave me dust. He gave me the paint. And, when this is something Hillman's not speaking about. And maybe there's no evidence for this in what he calls the primary sources. But this is crucially important because we're not talking about something that's 3 or 5,000 years old. We're talking about something that's 10, 15, 30, 50,000 years old. These soils, specific soils in the beaver bundle, in the Blackfoot way of life, there are 7 soils. There's a purple soil. There's a purple soil. Okay? And he's talking about, Hyllman is talking about texts where there's purple markings on people's faces, around their eyes, and so forth. And he's not thinking paint. He's thinking drug. He's thinking stain, like wine stains the lips. And this is what is probably any reference to purple is being interpreted as, because of the bizarre and confused inclination of moderns and Christians and Muslims and so forth. Actually, I can't speak for Islam particularly. I don't know. But to reject any idea having to do with pharmacon, right? The word that I usually use is pharmacopoeia, which means to make. Poia is to make, though I don't know the actual roots. So what's happening to me when I hear these words Haîma and Hymen, I'm thinking of the power, the spiritual power of the as yet unsexualized youths. And as Hyllman says that the Greeks talk at great length, particularly in Galen and perhaps in Nonus, about secretions from the bodies of youths and the mixture of these secretions with various botanicals and poisons, but he overlooks dusts. Or there's no mention in the primary sources. And what I'm trying to say is, it's blatantly obvious that the paints were absolutely crucial in ancient indigenous cultures. And these are soils almost invariably. Although the purple paint is said to come, if I recall correctly, is said to come from, it might be blue, but I think it's purple. I literally do. To come from the feces of a specific waterfowl, which is baked and possibly mixed with other substances. So, Hyllman loves to regale us with the vocal music of the purple, brah. The purple was in his eyes. He had taken the medicine. They'd given him the medicine. And he talks about ocular administration. He at least implies ocular administration of substances. Right? But, when transfers occur, which are crucial ceremonial initiations in Blackfoot, there's a few in the Blackfoot culture, and probably in many other indigenous cultures, which I know I have no first-hand knowledge of. But in the Blackfoot, there are a few things that are important, that are obvious. The first is it can't be secret. It can't be entirely secret. Someone has to witness the transfer. There has to be an observer, a witness. And hello, doglets. The second is the paint, the stain is made in the palm of the one who will transfer. And then the third is the singing. Now, there are other things going on which are not obvious in the superficial level of description. And this is very important because clearly these ceremonies, these initiatory rituals that bring someone into a family, right? They are filial bondings. They connect a person to an ancestral lineage. You can imagine like an amphitheater, but particularly where the backside of the amphitheater is the ancestral beings and the progenitive beings, the progenitors, and the other half of the amphitheater is the future, the children, the progeny. Now, this doesn't come from Blackfoot. This is my own thought. But also my experience, because after receiving the transfer, and I poorly, because I'm stupid and naive and somewhat confused and lazy, didn't understand. I mean, how can you understand the first time? I won't even talk about what happened to me the first time I engaged in actual sex. I'll leave that right out. But because of my incredible naivete, I didn't immediately continue with the process of securing this gift and this bond. But what happened were dreams. And I will not say the specifics of the dream because I think those are sacred and should not be spoken of. But I will say that it was very clear that ancient ancestors were coming to check me out. They wanted to smell my sweat. They wanted to know, who is this? Are they worthy? And what's interesting about this is when I began to study Tai Chi, very similar thing happened, right? I would have dreams where old Asian men would come in a group, in a pod, and they would check me out. And they would tell me straight up, we're here, we heard about you, It was a transfer. Learning Tai Chi is very similar. Right? And so the thing that I want to make clear here is this idea of transfer is very important and exists regardless of which culture we're looking at. Right? Did the Chinese have anything to do with the ancient Greeks? I can't answer the question, but I'm going to guess that okay, so look, this is what polymaths do. We integrate between otherwise seemingly distinct ways of knowing. They're integrators. We sew them together, right? As in the definition of Hymen joining, right? No, who would think this word Hymen has a relationship to transfer, but to join families together is a kind of sewing in the sense of SEW rather than SOW. Although, again, this SW thing is really the important feature. And look, think about what you get if you take the W and you put the S over it, right? I know this is going to sound mad, like madness, but stay with me, okay? Take the capital S and flop it over to either side. Flop it backwards, flop it forwards, so that it's lying on its vertex, okay? Its vertex is now horizontal. And then put the W behind it, okay? Just try this. Huh? Put the W behind it. And what do you have? You have a stitch, bruh. You have the joining. You have the wound of the W, annealed by the S, that curve, right? You also have this weird, almost oracular joining of principles, right? Angles and curves together. Dogs and cats, mating in the forest in a thunderstorm. But you have the angles and the curves. Right? Now, the W and the M are often understood as evocative of the feminine. The M of the wisdom, the night seeing of the owls. And this word begins words like mother, matron, Medea, Medusae, Medusae, as Hillman pronounces it, Medusae. And the W, which is of course the M inverted. Wow. I wonder if I can remember my alphabetics here. Way wide. It's travel and also to traverse, but it's mirroring too. In a sense, you have the M goes from the earth up to the sky, transmits energy through those points up to the sky, and the W draws energy down into the earth. But that's a poor dissertation on W, because it's been so long since I've tried to remember what I was shown when the teaching intelligences were with me. So what happened to me is I thought Hymen, joining, and Haîma, blood. These things obviously go together because when the hymen is broken, blood appears, right? And then the association with feminine medicine immediately brings to mind what we think of as stinging. Yeah? And I'll bet you're going to see a bunch of correlations here in the ancient Greek. I'll bet you that purple stings, right? It stings. And there's a prodigy, a sacred mystery in the Blackfoot origin story of the sun and the moon and their marriage on earth and the birth of their children, and the moon becoming seduced by another lover, which the sun detects. That's hilarious. Detexts. Detexts. Right? Untexted. Which the sun detects the scent of. And discovers that Koko Mekitsom, which is the Blackfoot word name for the moon. Natotsi, I think, is the Blackfoot name for the sun. Koko Mekitsom has been seduced by something described as a many-legged snake that lives in a hollow log. And then the snake idea implies stinging, right? The incredible, terrifying strike, the hypodermic, instantaneous envenomation, resulting from contact with a serpent. When you see someone or something actually bitten by a viper, or in some cases, a cobra or whatever, the strike is like lightning. It's literally, okay, what's actually happening, and people don't realize this, is that the animal is transforming time in 3 different ways. It's literally manipulating a temporal manifold locally. So the first thing it's doing that's obvious is that it, and this is very similar in Tai Chi or martial arts, right? Prior to a strike, you draw energy. There's a compression into the striking member, and then that compression is released very suddenly. A good example would be the concept in martial arts of the 1-inch punch. Right? No chance to gain velocity over time-space, right? You shrink time-space, and the suddenness with which the strike occurs absolutely changes time. And by the way, in case it's not obvious, combat, any kind of combat, is fast time. It's not, you think, oh no, the seconds are all the same. No, they're fucking not. Combat changes time. Intercourse changes time. Intercourse is the establishment of a mutual, rhythmic, temporal manifold between lovers. It transforms time. It changes the meaning of history in the future, just as the strike of the snake does, just as the venom does, just as the psychedelic does, just as dreaming does. Intoxication changes time. It transforms not merely how many meaningful events per second are there. Right? We go from like 0 or none or very few to suddenly 7, right? Or 9 or 50. The venom enters the bloodstream. It changes the meaning of a heartbeat. Okay? You see, the intoxicant enters the metabolic body of the being, changes the meaning of time, the pace, and the meaning of the tempo and the cadence. And then the venom also changes the future, because it may, in many cases, collapse the entire lifespan of a being into a few moments or hours, or, in very painful situations, days. Who was it? Is it Paul Rosalie, the Amazon protector? He speaks of a specific snake. I can't remember what he refers to it as euphemistically. It's like the guardian of the jungle or something like this. The jungle's warrior. This isn't the right language, but he implies that this is the spirit of the jungle. And when Lex Fridman asks him, why is this particular creature so terrifying? And Rosalie says, well, if you get bit by this, you don't call for like medical help, right? You call your mom to say goodbye. You pay attention to what's around you, because these are your last few moments of being alive. And notice what he's saying there. He's saying the venom changes time. Right? It transforms temporality. And we moderns think, oh no, you know, time is mechanical, tick tock, along the clock. The clock rate of the computer changes time. This is what we mean by megahertz and gigahertz and things like this. We're talking about more divisions of a second per second, mechanically. But long before there were mechanical divisions of any kind at all, there were relational divisions, sensorial divisions, cognitive divisions, magical divisions. And when a ceremony begins, the fundamental form of time changes. It is temporo-magical. It's time magic. I don't even have a word for this. I need some kind of a neologism here, and I'm not sharp enough to forge it immediately.
What's the designer dog?
So, what I thought of was Hymenoptera, right? I thought of a many-legged snake that lives in a hollow log. Those are bees or wasps. And why are they a snake? Because they sting, right? They have the sting of the snake. Suddenly you're being stung. By the way, you want to transform time? Piss off some wasps. You're gonna be transforming time in a huge way there. So I thought, the medicine, the venom, and the Hymenoptera, the matriarchal insect superorganisms that I've been fascinated by and stung by throughout my life, almost died from the transfer of venom I received from a yellow jacket when I was 7, 8 at the ocean. And I think those things can bite or sting. And I wasn't allergic to the venom. It was a septic problem, blood poisoning, because the yellow jackets don't have, they externalize their digestive system. So when they bite something, they inject digestive fluids into it, sort of externalizing their stomach. And whatever they've been eating, you know, rotten fish, dead shellfish, right? Bits of gelatinous, festering crab meat, you know, whatever they've been feasting on at the ocean, that gets hypodermically injected into your skin. And in some cases, that's not going to go well. And in my case, it did not go well. My arm turned purple. The doctors told my parents I might die. I couldn't eat food. For many, many weeks, I was in agony. But the thing is, and this is something Medea must have known, and those who trained her must have known, when a living being envenomates you, that's a transfer between those people and your people. If you get bitten by a rattlesnake and you survive, the magic of their people is in you. And with that magic comes knowledge. That is a joining, right? That is Hymen, sewing, joining together. So, if the concepts that Nate so generously integrated are good, right? I have more to learn about this. But mainly I'm here to correct what I said earlier and to explain why I was confused. And how my confusion hopefully is transforming in the direction of insight. Now, if Mnemosyne and the muses guide me well in my walkabout, Yes, when you take of a plant substance, you are joined to those beings. When you take of an animal substance, you are joined to those beings. This ridiculously silly idea that we have, silly for its simplicity. In English, oh, you are what you eat. That's the redneck version of wisdom. No, you actually, the ancestors of the beings you consume or you encounter and have chemical intercourse with become a part of you, not a part, become integrated into your being. And their intelligences and their memories and their gnosis, their seeing, becomes integrated into you, as the people who think mushrooms are the source of insight will aver. And yet, how confused they are. Because the spirit of insight belongs to no specific substance. And it can be evoked or elicited, invoked, summoned. It can be brought forth with nothing more than language, the music of speaking. Yesterday, when I met the brilliant painter, is his name perhaps, let me get it right. Let me get this right. I had seen this man painting, and I asked him if I could speak with him because I wanted to know if he sold his paintings. I felt so overwhelmed by the living light in his paintings that I wanted to have one. Joe Barlow. And so he was painting, and I very politely and delicately inquired, "May I speak with you?" And he just turned to me and rather sternly shook his head. And I understood. Because the speaking is the end of the trance of the enchantment. But the speaking can also begin the enchantment. And when I ran into him yesterday and spoke with him briefly while I was making my recording, he commented on my melodious voice. And so these people who think, psychedelics are the gateway to enlightenment, they are confused. The gateway to enlightenment is passion, curiosity, wonder, awe, the virtues. Why is it that the children, the youths, who have not yet been initiated into sexual congress, why are these the oracles? They are the oracles because their essence is unmixed, as yet unmixed, with the progenerative anatomy of the processes that become the incarnation of souls. And look, I'm not trying to defame sexuality here at all. I'm saying that there's a virtue there are virtues that emerge from the suspension of various behaviors. Suspend the behavior of eating for a few days, and you will discover exactly what it is I'm talking about. Right? suspend the behaviors associated with the generation of orgasm. Suspend those behaviors. Practice chastity. And you will discover that the energies of our existence transform when conserved. And they transform in ways that are impossible to suspect, right? In the same way that insight obliterates previous conception and expectation and thought, speculation and so forth. Actual insight is like
I go to sleep being like, I saw these conclusions.
it's as if the mind of an angel suddenly casts a ray of light into your consciousness, dissolving its previous forms and reforging them in beauty and veracity and the forms of truth that lie far beyond the concept of fact, the spiritual forms of truth. And the fruits of actual virtue are profound. Yes, there's another path where transgression leads to madness and ecstasy. It's it's the antipodes of 2 points on a hypersphere, right? A 4-dimensional sphere. Where the 4th dimension, actually it's probably a 7-dimensional sphere, but the other dimensions are things like relation, time, the ancestors, the progeny in the future who will learn and know and remember. The violation of structure on one hand, and the delicate, perfect preservation of not structure, not the bones, but the marrow, the spirit of the bones, on the other hand. And these are matters which we have long forgotten, and I don't know how familiar Hyllman is with them. I mean, he's definitely familiar with the with what we would think of as the vulgar side, right? Definitely. But is he familiar with the side of virtue? Does he understand that does he understand the power of conservation of energies, conservation of spirit? What does he know of the path of virtue? Does he revere it as I do? You know, I have been, for the past few moments, with one of the sacred trees, and I heard Hyllman and the guy who runs the Gnostic Informant podcast, and also a young man who they referred to as Ariel, on their podcast about Baal and the Canaanites and so forth, I think. Yesterday, talking about images of people underneath trees, and particularly of the fact that the acacia trees, which are apparently the trees that the Ark of the Covenant is forged from. Those roots contain the highest concentration of DMT in any tree. And but again, you know, when we move toward the physical, we move toward the vulgar. The vulgar in the sense of the loss of nuanced richness and depth. And because it, right, the difference between the steam and the water and the ice. The steam is reminiscent of spirit, the water of, well, this is complicated. I've gotten myself into metaphoric trouble here. We could imagine the water is reminiscent of dreaming. And the ice, the extremely structured, as reminiscent of waking. The spiritual, quote unquote, can sometimes be just understood as more dimensions of meaning, awareness, seeing, relation, memory, more dimensions. But what I wanted to say is, yes, of course, you can take a nap, beneath the night. You can go to sleep underneath the devil's trumpet. You can take you can take your rest underneath the datura. And its dusts, its pollens will impregnate you like those bandages worn by the youths who'd cut their skin. Oh yeah, we got to go back to this. So obviously you can there are ways to develop resistances to toxins and venoms through constant exposure and titration over time, right? So I've heard stories that long ago, medicine women, the specific stories I heard were of the mother of what was being referred to as the mother of vaccines. And they presented an image of a woman in ancient India who would use thorns or needles to scratch the skin of the patient and introduce antidotes and drugs, but also particularly like she could vaccinate people by introducing extremely small amounts of the infective agent through the skin scratches, so that the patients would produce antibodies, essentially, right? Or antigens. And what Hyllman is clearly speaking of having read about in what he calls primary sources, which I believe to be primary sources, just to be clear, is a practice whereby cuts are made on the skin, and there's different things you can do. So you can introduce intoxicants through these scratches by wrapping them in a medicated bandage, right? A bandage impregnated with substances. We will leave aside for the moment what the origins of those various substances may be. And you can also introduce antidotes this way, or intoxicants, right? So you can introduce drugs, possibly vaccines or poisons. And you can imagine that there was an elaborate culture of killing by poison, right? And I'm not going to, I'm not going to try to say like, look, there's an explicit division between the genders here. But the men mostly killed with weapons in combat, which changes time. The women were masters of intoxicants and poisoning, which changes time. And you can imagine that if you are, for example, a harlot or a prostitute, male or female, right? You may have become immune to certain venoms by the temporal and physical titration of these venoms over time, introducing them into your bloodstream, into your body, so that you are no longer subject to their toxic effects. You can then eat or drink with someone whom you wish to kill, and they will die and you will not, because the dose that kills them is less than what will kill you. And this is a delicate and dangerous art, but it's very clearly still practiced, today in relatively exotic locales and persons, right? There must be traditional lines along which this knowledge has been preserved and handed down, complex texts, forbidden texts. Pharmacopoeia, the arts of poisoning, the arts of intoxication, the arts of curing, the arts of resurrection. And so you see this concept of joining, sewing together, is all through these topics. But what I wanted to say about the trees is, yes, you can sleep beneath the datura, okay, at night, when its fragrance is thick in the atmosphere. And wow, is that fragrance thick? And you can sleep beneath it when it's dropping pollen. And many trees drop pollen, right? Again, we come back to dusts. I suspect very strongly that there were pollens that were also used curatively, toxically, and in pursuit of euphoria, right? There were pollens, dusts, and soils. So you can sleep beneath a tree, but there's so many things you can do with a tree that don't require the physical ingestion or introducing chemistry to your metabolism. You can have the spiritual transfer. You can have the spiritual communion, the spiritual inception, relation, anamnesis, with nothing more than your passion, your curiosity, your wonder, your awe, your soul, your embodied soul, and any of the forms in nature. the raccoon, the mouse, the snake, the tree, the living place, the mountain, the sky, the star, the planet. All of these beings are your kin, and you are their kin. And the recovery of those intimacies results in euphoric transportation into insight. You know, I was just with a tree that I'm very close with, and I got to tell you, there's no intoxicant required to experience communion with the great world forest. The history, the family of the history of all the trees, and the family history of this particular tree. And all of the beings that the trees nurture and heal, rejuvenate and feed and support. Yeah. These are sacred relationships. And you know, you could say, yes, well, why don't you become sexual with the spirit of the tree? It's a doable thing. I'm not going to instruct you in the process. It's a doable thing. Regardless of your regardless of your gender preferences, you can have orgasms with features of nature if that's what you want to do. And I'm not casting aspersions on that. What I'm trying to say is that all of the effects that are accessible by relatively, I guess the only word I really have is vulgar, or all of these effects, all of these states, all of these transfers of knowledge and initiation and gnosis and anamnesis are accessible by very subtle means, and I prefer these subtle means, generally speaking. It's not that I never, play with intoxicants or something. I do. I have. Rather that you want to train your spirit to become sophisticated in its capacities to bond with the cognitia, the network of anciently conserved intelligences prior to and embodied in nature. Yeah. To travel in the connective tissue of those relationships, which I call the mimula. And that travel, you will find healing, enlightening, provocative and profound, generative of staggering insight that will knock you off your feet. You may think intoxicants are trippy. You have no idea what it's like to have the sudden emergence of insight in and as what previously you thought was your mind while you're sober. So these are the virtues that I adore and recommend, that I remember, that I myself pursue and have experienced. So don't be too quick to leap toward, let's get fucked up and have forbidden sex. Right? There's something so much better. Well, I won't say better, but vastly different. And you should taste the pure water of life and memory, which are truly your origin, before you become too fascinated with the liquors and the toxins and the venoms. before you think that they have primacy, you should taste the original waters. This is my recommendation. And hopefully I have corrected my error, my mondegreen about Haîma and Hymen. But before I go, I will mention one other thing. Consider the hemophiliac. Consider the person or child who, if they are just scratched in the wrong way, will bleed out right quick. And the beloved child of someone beloved to me was born with this delicate condition. Think about the nature of time and how time is changed by this condition. The brightness, the redness, the fire. Consider this matter. For there you will find some insight that I will leave here undisclosed. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning and seeing and speaking and traveling together in search of insight, anamnesis, wonder, and beauty. Again, very soon. May your path be blessed and joyful, rejuvenative and healing. And may you find not merely that which you most desire, but that which is most beneficial for your path, development, and relationships. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to our further adventures and to learning and remembering together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.